Hello everyone, it's Thumper the Rabid Rabbit. A lot of excitement around the new battery behavior. Seeing all your comments from last night's videos, you're all asking the right questions. The first question and the biggest question everyone seems to want to know the answer to is, does this mean we don't need to build UPS or uninterruptible power supply systems anymore? Some people call it infinite power supply, but yeah, the answer is technically no. The way that this is built now, so long as you can charge the battery faster than the maximum output load, then we won't need to build UPS circuits anymore, because you just dump all of your extra input power or generators or whatever into the battery to keep it charged, and dump in more than you're using and it will charge faster than it drains, and so the battery unit itself becomes the UPS. Some people have commented that this is maybe a little unrealistic, but let's assume for the moment that this box here is more than just a bunch of, battery cells, that it is some sort of charge controller or battery management unit and actually acts as a rectifier or power correction system in itself, which wouldn't be unusual for the real world to have a controller on it that just takes power, charges the battery, and sends through the extra, or rectifies on the fly in and out of the battery, that kind of thing. So while realistically it would be prudent to have a maximum input of maybe 2, 3, 5 times as much as the output, because that would be a little more realistic with today's real world technology. You can't, well, most batteries you can't charge infinitely higher than their output. But most batteries you can put more in than you take out of them in most conditions, or at least you can manage it through your charge controller. So right now I'm putting 300 into this, so I'm definitely putting in more than it can take out because its max output is 100. So yes, we have effectively eliminated the need for UPS circuitry. Another big advantage of this, if any of you have problems with circuits where you're running timers or other logical circuitry downstream from your battery, and that all gets messed up if you switch from like solar power to battery and back again every time you change sources, it would mess up things like timers and some of your other logic with that loss, that pulse loss of power. Now that we can flow everything through the battery as a single sort of UPS element by itself, we don't have to worry about losing power anymore, unless somebody, of course, destroys your battery. So that could be a big game changer as well. Okay, so user Lorsch from YouTube was asking if the splitter bug is still present, so we're going to go ahead and set that up here to test. You can see we've got just a test generator in this case because it's consistent. And then we got power going into the splitter, and then as you'd expect, it splits the output 3 ways into 3 outputs of 33 evenly each, because the test generator puts out 100. And now we'll do a quick server restart and see what happens. Alright, and the server is coming back up now. So we will reconnect and see what the status of the splitter is here. My expectation, if I were a betting man, that the bug is not fixed. In fact, splitter bug is not fixed. So if you got a splitter and it survives a reboot of the server, you still get triple the power output for free. Now, one question will be, how will that affect the new dynamics of the batteries? Since right now the circuit power appears to be getting calculated different than the battery loads. Like, for example, here it thinks these components are only using 34 units of power, which would be accurate, but if you look all the way to the end of this string, it runs out of 50 units before the end. So it's not calculating the usage on the circuit the same way it calculates the load on the battery yet. Again, we've still got a week left before wipe. So the question here would be, with this bug, technically you are tripling your output power from 100 to almost 300, but what would this look like if you attach it to a battery? So yeah, that kind of remains to be seen what the end behavior is going to be of bugs like this and how it relates to battery load, because things like the displays aren't technically a load themselves right now in the new battery behavior. So we'll have to see how this all gets calculated sort of backwards to batteries versus forwards for circuit totals. So Lorsh, I hope that answers your question. Looks like splitter bug still exists. So let me move on to a couple other interesting behaviors that we have right now in staging. Again, this is November 2nd, 2019, so we still got a week of things to change. You can see that right now we've got 2 root combiners on here configured for their default. They no longer consume power for themselves, so right now they just consume the 2 power that they have configured for each of their branches. An interesting behavior which happens here, if I change this to say 10, the battery load also goes up by 10. So even though there isn't a load on this branch, just configuring it for 10 causes it to become a consumer of 10 units of power. Some people don't like that. I would agree it's not realistic, but you know, it's not terrible because you do have control over it to some degree. But it isn't dependent on the load, it's dependent on the configuration. So you can jack up the load on your battery just by changing this setting. Again, ideally, if that setting were the maximum amount that gets prioritized out of the branch, rather than creating a consumption, an artificial consumption on the battery, that would be ideal. The other thing is, it doesn't count any load out of the power out until you actually connect something. So I'm going to connect this display, or counter, sorry, to the power out, and you'll see the load goes up to 5. So there's 2 out of this branch, 2 out of this branch, and now the counter is displaying 1 unit for itself. And, funny thing, even though the counter is only using 1 unit of power from the battery's perspective, it's still displaying the total amount of power available from the battery, because the battery can put out a maximum of 100, and we're consuming 4 here and 1 for itself. So that means there's still, oh, that actually doesn't add up right, does it? Oh, it's consuming 5 because that's its circuit calculation, and then it's 1 for itself. So it's a little, actually that doesn't make sense either. Yeah, bear with me, I'm doing this live, but like, this is buggy still, right? So it's cool that there's a change to how components consume power, but it also is very buggy because we're still a week away and they're just changing this behavior right now. So one other thing I want to look at while we're in here is the behavior of some of the other components. Just grab a few of these. I'm not going to do all of them. But yeah, the question was, do the components themselves all still consume power? Since the branch only consumes what it's configured for, what happens with some of these other circuits? So let's take a look. I'm going to put in XOR here. It still consumes 1 unit of power. Memory cells did not consume a unit of power previously, but looks like it does now. And let's hook up the RAN switch. Does that give us another unit? 3, yep. So, yeah, so the branch has been configured to not consume its own unit of power, just what it's configured to. But it looks like some of our other components here still consume a unit. And the unfortunate part about this is the memory cell used to be a great like extension cable coupler because it didn't consume power. At least it didn't on its inverted. Let's see what happens if we do that. Let's get a couple of these guys together and just off the inverted outputs. Run that off of here, see what it takes for a load. Yep, consumes 3 units of power. So, still the same behavior. You notice how the output here is still 99. So they're not taking away power from the total output available, but they all do count against the battery's load. So the lesson you got to take away from this right now is that we used to only have calculations of how much circuits were, how much was left on a circuit. So if you put 100 on there, then every component you added to it would take some away from its maximum amount of power available on the circuit. Well, that calculation still seems to be largely unchanged. It looks like the battery is using a completely different methodology to calculate its consumption. So it doesn't care about, that there's still 99 left at the end here, that these aren't taking away from the maximum load, or the maximum amount that could go on the circuit, or max that's left on the circuit, but they do count towards the battery load. I would almost expect this to work back the other way. As they fix the bugs in this, I would expect that this calculation will be the calculation used throughout the circuit, so that the consumption on the battery and the consumption along the circuit is all effectively the same calculation. So we'll see what happens with that long term. Alright, I need to switch over scenes here and take a look at something else. Alright, we're back. So the thing I wanted to set up here was a few more test generators, because I wanted to see where we were on the limit of the input on the batteries. I tested it first on the small batteries, and now I'm just checking it, double checking on the large batteries, but it looks like there is, in fact, an input limit. We did see from this morning from Alistair that not having the same input limit as output limit was an intended behavior, but there was no real clear answer on what the input limit was. Well, I can tell you that math has revealed that the input limit is 4x. So that means 40 for the small battery, 400 for the large battery. I can prove that because right now I'm putting 500 units into the large battery. I'm going to start a stopwatch right now at 14,294. So we're going to watch this for 1 minute. And you'll see the rate's climbing up pretty fast. Not like it's not charging quickly. As you can see, we got 499 coming in here, so almost 500. But close enough for government work. And we're now at 30 seconds. Keep letting this go a little bit longer. And of course, I have a pretty small load on here right now, so it's not like it would drain the battery that fast anyway. There's 42 seconds. We're almost there. What we're watching here is this capacity number that's climbing. Alright, and here we come on 1 minute. Right now. So that's 14,605 roughly. So if I take 14,605 minus 14,294, which is where we started, that's 311 units. If I divide that into... Now remember, this is 80% efficient, right? So for every 100 units that we're putting in here, we should be adding 80 units to the battery every minute. What we added was a little over 311, 312. If you do the math on that, it's a factor of 4. So it's 80% of 400, not 80% of 500. 320 or 32, and depending on the size of the battery, they're all factors of 10, right? So about 320 units in a minute is actually 80% of 400. So that's what tells me that anything over 400 in here, or 4x, doesn't make a difference. I had the same experience on these small batteries. When I was charging them, I put like 500 or 400 units into them, and they only add 8 units per minute at 10, 16 at 20, 24 at 30, and 32 at 40, 32 at 50, 32 at 60, 32 at 100, 32 at 500. So that means the input power then is limited to 40 units or 4x of its output. And that's consistent between the small and the large batteries. So there is, in fact, an input limit, but with an input limit of 4 times your maximum output, and with the ability to, use smaller than your maximum output now, those are both huge game changers. Even if they just had increased the input max by 4 times, it would have been a game changer. With the output being calculated and the input being increased, you can really leverage a lot more lifespan out of these batteries. All right, let me reset one more time here. I'm going to come back and take a look at the root combiner behavior. Okay, we're back. So a lot of you were asking about root combiners in the comments, and I mentioned that they're buggy. So they're buggy, but they're almost buggy in an advantageous, almost cheat kind of way. Depends on how you're using them right now. So I set up 3 small batteries. They're mostly charged enough that we can do some testing here. So watch what happens. If I just take 2 of these, put them into a root combiner, you get 20 units of output, like you'd expect. 10 from this guy, 10 from this guy. I'll put it into this counter here. You can see we're getting 20. That's how it would have behaved previously. And it still does. Combining 2 batteries gives you their combined total output. You can do that. Problem in the past is that they would drain and die because there's no way to put a blocker before the root combiner, which is still true. So there is a difference now, though, in that before this meant you would just drain the batteries, they'd go dead, and you have no choice. Now, since you could charge them faster than they discharge, technically that isn't the sole problem anymore. The weird buggy right now is you can see that it has a power output or a load of 2 on this battery. It also has a power load of 2 on this battery. I'll plug in this branch, which is configured for 2 also. Now its power load is 4. The 2 for the branch, the display, the counter, and the root combiner. So there's 4 units. This one has 4. This one has 4. I'll prove it. I'll change this to, let's say, 7, so we add 5 more to it. This one's 9. This one's 9. Now, in the real world, you would have expected this to be split, right? Like between the 9 units of power, you'd expect 4, 4.5 to come from here, and 4, 4.5 to come from here. So the bug right now is that the power load calculation is kind of double dipping on the batteries. It's taking the full current active load from both batteries, and that continues if you extend it. So if I put another root combiner in here, add a 3rd battery, all 3 batteries, okay, this battery's still at 9. This one would be at 10, but we've added another root combiner, or it would be at 9, but we've added another power unit, so now we're at 10. So both of these are at 10. So again, we're double dipping. Really, this should be just 10 from one or 10 from the other if you were really counting the consumption, but clearly we are not. Now, the reason this is advantageous is because you still get the maximum 30 units of output that's available here. I'll hook up this guy. You can see there's still 21 left over. So they still act like when you were combining batteries before. You still get 30 units of usable power right now. The downside is if you were only using 10 units of power, you still drain all the batteries, all 3 of the batteries evenly. So instead of 10 unit load consuming like 3, 3, and 3, or 10 from one and nothing from the others, it consumes 10 from all 3. So the bug is sort of a double dip, triple dip, whatever unlimited dip bug where it draws the same amount of power from every battery that's being combined. Now, of course, I can run some power into these. That's good enough. So let's say I take 150 of input power, which is way more than I need, and run into each of these batteries. And now you'll see that even though they're under full load, they're still charging. So, buggy. All right, what can I say? The reason why I would call this advantageous is because in the past the only way to keep from killing your batteries was putting a blocker between the battery and the root combiner, which of course drained the battery, and that was pointless. Now, since we can charge faster than we discharge, it actually becomes reasonable to root combine batteries even without the blocker. Yes, you're always draining the batteries. You can't stop that because you can't put the blocker in between still. But at least you can still charge them, which makes them not worthless in this configuration. You just have to make sure that most of the time you're putting more power into the battery than they're taking out. And don't put extra batteries on if you don't need them, because this double dipping bug is just going to steal power from all of them. But we got a week before wipe, so like everything else that's going on here, some quirky behaviors, some unexpected calculations, some doing the old method, some doing the new method. Obviously rendering is still weird because half my branches aren't on the wall. There we go. So yeah, more to come. I'll have more updates over the next week as we see more of these changes occur and bugs get fixed. So I hope that helps. Good luck and don't suck.